Welcome to episode 153 of the Confidence Through Health podcast with Heather Hausenblas, who is a PhD health psychologist. She owns Wellness Discovery Labs, and we talk about a little bit about what Wellness Discovery Labs does in validating some of the claims that people are making about their health products. We talk about the research that she's done around the psychology of health and how, our psychology and how we think about things and how we approach things from a mental standpoint and in a relationship standpoint plays out in our health and our decisions and all of those things combine to create either a healthy or an unhealthy body that we live in. She shares some great tips and she has some great products. She's written a book, Invisible Illness, and she also has several journals that she's written that help you along your journey, because a lot of times it's not necessarily just making the decision or knowing what to do. It's either how do we hold ourselves accountable or having the tools to be able to help us along the way. And that helps us in the creation of our healthy person as we age, as we move from this moment to the next. And that's really what it's all about, is trying to find out how do we become healthy? How do we take the next step? And how do we do so in a way where our mind comes along with us and understands that we are actually doing things in a great way and we are a great person and we are moving forward without being negative to ourselves. So I thought it was a great conversation. There's a lot of great tips and information and ways to think about changing your life that she presents to us. So I think you're going to really enjoy it. So thank you, Heather, for being a guest on the Confidence Through Health podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So you're a professor, but you started at your own wellness lab, Wellness Discovery Lab. And so that brings a whole nother, I think, complexity to the health picture, because it's not just teaching people, but it's okay, you've found that there's other issues and things, right? So tell us a little bit about one, why health is important to you. Why is it something you want to talk about and help people with? But other, why did you decide okay, we need to have a lab that goes into these issues with people?
Right. So just to, let the listeners know, my background is psychology, and my PhD focused actually in health psychology and health behaviors. And kind of the premise behind it is most people want to be healthy. They kind of know, yes, I should exercise and I need to get enough sleep. But the challenge is the psychology aspect, our behaviors and our habits. And that's where what I come in to do and people in my field do. So I've researched over the course of my career kind of the psychological effects of exercise, of diet, of sitting too much and sleeping and stress. And it's difficult. People want to be healthy and they struggle with how to, and there's so much misinformation out there. So one of my goals was to bring the science aspect of it. So how do you really know, how much you're supposed to exercise or how much you're supposed to stand during the day or sleep? So I've studied these different aspects. And over the course of my career, I've loved to, lecture and talk to the students, but I also felt it was really important to speak to the media when they would contact me, let's say about something like, what supplement actually makes you sleep better? And I could pull the science in and talk about it from that standpoint, because some of these media headlines that you see out there are almost over the top extravagant. I remember one that said that drinking a glass of red wine was the equivalent to exercising for an hour. And that was all over the media. And intuitively, I think, well, that would be, wonderful if that was the case. But obviously, it's not. And when you dig into actually this media article that came out, the science that it was referring to was like an animal study, and it was really obscure and it really didn't pull together. So it's difficult for people. So not only do I lecture, but I also do a lot of writing, kind of trying to break down the complexity of science into a digestible format for people to understand, let's say, what are the science-based, 5 science-based tips to reduce your stress or to, eat healthier, things, things along those lines. And then I started my company, Wellness Discovery Labs, a few years back, really based on a need where I began to have different health wellness companies reach out to me. And And I thought this was great because they would have, let's say it was some type of a product or a supplement, and they wanted the science behind it to say, okay, how do we really know that this is going to reduce people's stress or make them sleep better or give them more energy? So I had the power as an independent third party in my research team to design research studies and then test it. And then we would present the results to the companies. And honestly, sometimes they work and sometimes they, sometimes they don't. So I think it's really important, for consumers to be able to know that there should be science behind what they're doing from a health wellness standpoint.
Right. And so, one of the big pieces that you mentioned there, which is something that I always tell people when they're looking at supplements or even vitamins or something, is like, okay, well, how do I know? I see all this marketing and all this, and anybody can spend money on marketing and put words to it. And like you said, like, how do you know? And so that third party tested is a big piece, right? That's what people need to look for.
They need to look, they need to, unfortunately, you need to spend some time, looking at it. And especially with supplements, they're extremely popular. And oftentimes I tell people, it's unfortunate, but it's almost what you pay for is what you get. So if you're going and buying, let's say, the cheapest supplement out there, it's probably filled with a lot of things that shouldn't be in it. So it's a matter of getting behind, a trusted brand, becoming familiar with it, and looking really closely at the website to see if this company is actually invested in doing their own research on their own products is really important.
Yeah. And it's key to make sure that third party is coming from a trusted lab as well. Like, it's more than just, like you said, with the headlines. And I've seen that too with different headlines. And it's like, okay, where did the study come from? Who funded the study? You got to go all the way back, because sometimes, companies that are struggling to make money or struggling to make they'll pay to get something that says, okay, yeah, this actually works for this, but then they might twist the words or, slight misinformation just to be able to say, oh, but it works for these other things too.
Right. And that's and that really is the challenge, right? And to be able to kind of understand the science. And one of the things I would encourage people to do, if you're going to check out, the website, and if they report that their supplement does, reduces anxiety by 50%, for example, we'll see if they've actually done their own research and if this research has actually been published in what we call a peer-reviewed journal by other researchers and other scientists, because sometimes, companies will unfortunately fabricate or exaggerate, the importance of their supplement. And I always tell people, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, because there really isn't, just one supplement out there, for example, that is going to change your life and cure you of everything. It's a whole host of things regarding our health and our wellness. And I think, supplements, really good supplements, is just one part of our overall health.
Right. And that's where the psychology piece comes in, right? Because you have to not only take the time to know yourself and know sort of what you've done, admit to yourself what you've done to yourself to get you where you are, whether it's positive or negative. And then okay, what do I have to change to get to where I need to be, before just going, oh, well, my friend said this supplement works for her, so let me start taking it. It's, well, but do I need the same result that she needs? Right.
And you bring up an excellent point, because for some people, a supplement will work, and for others it will not, because we're all individuals and we're all really, really complex. And this was several years ago. I did a study on a sleep supplement for a company, and they were just about to launch this supplement. And we did a randomized controlled trial. And at the end of the study, when I asked the company to unblind us, which they did, so we were figuring out what was the actual supplement and what was the placebo.
Yeah.
What happened was that the supplement didn't work, and the placebo actually performed better than the supplement. And it was a very difficult conversation to have with this company. And it's almost, when we had it, that they were mad at us. And I said, look, and they came back and they said, can you find something that's significant in the data that we can, use and report? I said, well, probably, but I said, that's not what we do. I said, we were tasked with a certain job, and unfortunately it doesn't work. And about 2 weeks later, the head of the company came back to me and thanked me. He said, you know what, you've saved us millions of dollars. We realize now we got the formula wrong, and we have pulled it it off of like the assembly line. So it's stuff like that, and it's a challenge to find those really ethical companies. But once you do, get behind it, and that's where you can buy your products, because there really are some great companies out there.
Right. And that's the psychology piece of understanding like what I need, right, comes down that, and that's a huge piece of almost like turning off the media and turning off like what you think right? As a health coach, I have people that come to me, and one of the first things I ask them is like, okay, well, what do you believe? Like, what are the myths that you've tried, or fad diets or different things that like, because I need to know the baseline of like how, like almost like how dirty is the system that I've got to clean out mentally, not necessarily physically, because that's a huge challenge if somebody's not really ready to accept where they are.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You bring up such an excellent point, because when you ask people, about health and wellness, most people will say that they want to be, healthy, or healthier, but it's a challenge for them to know where to start and what they, and what they actually need to do. And when we talk about diet and what type of diet to follow, it's overwhelming and it's daunting. Oh, yeah. I call it the diet wars that are out there. should it be paleo, keto, Mediterranean, Whole30? And an interesting study just very recently just came out, which tested kind of 4 of our most popular kind of healthy diets to see which one is the best and which one trumps all of the others. And at the end of the day, all of these diets were really healthy for people. They all had longevity effects and reduced people's chances, of getting certain diseases. And, the kind of the takeaway is that, it should be largely plants, like a plant-based diet, and have your legumes and your seeds and your healthy oils. But what's really nice is that there's flexibility in that, because it's really hard for people to stick to one diet all the time. And what I tell people is try to eat, as much fruits as vegetables as possible and do the best that you can. But we're human as well. And we're going to, we're going to eat some things that may not be the healthiest, and that's okay. Enjoy it, but don't make that the most, the biggest part of what you're eating on a day-to-day basis.
Well, and you mentioned a big piece there is enjoy it. Like one of the things I try to transition people from is, I think, which most people understand is, I ate that, ice cream or bag of Oreos or whatever it was that I knew wasn't healthy for me, but, and I ate too much of it. And so now I've got this guilt factor. And the next day I wake up and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm horrible because I did that last night. And, and you let it linger and sort of define who you are. And I tell people like, okay, well, if you want the ice cream, then make a manual decision and say, okay, I'm going to have the ice cream. I know it's going to cause this effect or that effect, or it's not healthy or whatever, but like make the decision, have the ice cream and move on and like leave it in the past, right? Like, it's not like this lingering thing that's going to affect you forever, because in the real world, for most of us, the only time we're ever going to die from a single meal is if we choke on it and nobody's there to do the Heimlich, right? Most of us are not going to just keel over and die because we ate one certain thing.
You know what? Exactly. I think that's so smart of you to be telling your clients this, because oftentimes people will feel like a failure, like, oh my gosh, I ate a cookie or I ate a bowl of ice cream. And I'm like you, I'm like, no, you know what? Enjoy it, but don't go and eat the whole carton, of it, and kind of follow whether it's like an 80-20 or a 90-10 rule, where let's say 80% of your diet is really, really healthy. And then you leave yourself, a little bit of room to enjoy stuff and be human and celebrate with friends, or, whatever it may be, because there's very few people that can follow, and be healthy all the time and never miss a day of exercise and get their 7 to 8 hours of sleep, every night. So I think that's important, to allow people the opportunity to say it's okay, and to not beat themselves up over it, or then to say, well, I've eaten that bowl of ice cream, so now I might as well forget about my diet for the rest of the month, and I'll start again, on February 1st. Now that's not okay. Just pick up, where you left off.
Right. And so, like, and you mentioned dealing with stress, which I know is a big piece of the psychology factor as well. Is that we've got so much going on in our world right now, right? And it's not going to slow down. It's just going to keep getting busier and busier. And so, dealing with that stress, not just from a like from a food standpoint, but just like overall, there's a big piece of the psychology and how that affects us. So how should we be dealing with stress besides just, I think everybody knows, like, and everybody's heard, like, okay, well, if I go exercise, that's a stress reliever. I get it. But like, and sometimes it's not enough.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent question with stress. Most of us, we're living in, an age of stress, and many of us are under, chronic stress. And there's many things that we can do to kind of set ourselves up. And don't look at stress like as the villain, because we are going to experience stress. Realize that and say, okay, well, what can I do to set myself up for success? So, for example, if let's say you've got a big presentation or an important meeting or a really tight schedule, the following day, then begin to set yourself up for success, because there are many, many things that we can do that will help us deal with the stress better. And oftentimes we're not even aware of it. First and foremost, like getting a good night's sleep, and trying to move more during the day, and eat, and eat healthy. These things really do affect how we're able to handle the stress. But you don't want to look at these things also as a stressor. So, for example, some people just do not like to exercise, and they do not like to go to the gym. And then that can become a big stressor for them. And I tell people, you know what? Exercise is not for everybody. It's a really important health behavior, but if you don't like going to the gym and lifting weights and working out vigorously, there's many other types of movement that you can do that are going to be really, really good for your overall health. As simple as going for like a 10-minute walk or standing more during the day. And we're kind of finding now, a fascinating study just recently came out finding that the activities that we do during the day, like let's say walking up and down the stairs and vacuuming, and these kind of quick bursts of energy throughout the day, actually have significant health effects. So I think people really need to take a look at what they like to do and what they enjoy doing. And one of the top things that people say for like why they don't exercise is they don't have the time. And I tell people, well, probably if you took a look at how much time you were spending on like your device and your social media, you'd probably realize that you do have the time. But I tell people then, combine, instead of going and meeting your friend, for coffee for an hour, why not go for a walk with them? And it accomplishes, accomplish kind of that same thing, because being socially connected is very, very important for our health. We tend to think about, the diet, the exercise, the sleep, and those are really important. But we do find that being socially connected is really important. One study that came out several years ago tried to kind of put it into perspective, saying that people who report that they're lonely or socially isolated was the equivalent from a health standpoint of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So to kind of put it in perspective. Then I have people say, well, if I have a lot of friends, is it okay that I smoke? I'll be like, no, that's not how it works. But it's just to put it in perspective for people that we really do need to foster our social connections. And that can be close family and friends. It can be coworkers. It can even be like your casual acquaintance, like that person, let's say that you that makes your coffee every day, at the local coffee shop. Even those casual connections as well. So it's really important for us to have those connections, and that social media does not oftentimes equal being socially connected. We know that people who spend more time on their devices and social media tend to have poor overall health.
Well, and part of that is the psychology piece of like, well, now I'm comparing myself to everybody else's, top 5% of their life, because that's what most of social media winds up being, is, this person that is at the gym that's working out, that's shredded bodybuilder type or whatever, or they're posting that, hey, I just finished my 10-mile run, or here's my super nutritious meal, and it's like, oh well, I don't do that. And we can get very down on ourselves. And so I agree with you that putting it down and having that social connection, because I know one of the things that I've heard, I can't remember the study that I saw it in, but that once you start looking at people that are 80, 90, 100 years old and asking them, like, what are their secrets? And of course, the ones that make the headlines are, oh, this person drank a Dr. Pepper every day, or,
Yes,
those types
yes.
of things make the headlines, right?
Yeah.
But then when you find out, you're like, oh, but they had a core group of people, 5 or 6 people that they hung around with and they communicated with, not just once they turned 80, but like for their whole life. And so, like you said, it's that relationship. And it's almost like, well, I don't want to go anywhere because, I'm connected to them. And so you get that vibrancy from them. But I think it's also because when you are struggling, you have that person to talk to and you're not alone.
Exactly. We're social beings, and we really do need to connect with people. And you bring up an excellent point, right? It's what we're doing over our entire life. It's not
Right.
just, let's say the last decade. Our health behaviors track. So what I mean by that is, if you're eating fairly healthy and you're exercising and you have a great group of friends when you're a kid, then that's going to probably stick with you into your teenage years and your adult years as well. But it's so important. And we often don't think about our social connections as being so healthy for us. And what I try to put in perspective for people, there's a fascinating group of studies that came out many years ago, and it actually started by accident, because a lot of things that we find out about health and wellness, we stumble upon almost by accident when we're looking for something else. And it occurred in a small town called Roseto in Pennsylvania. And the local physician there, and this was in 1960, noticed that heart disease was non-existent in people under the age of 65. Now, what made this so unusual is that, and it still is to this day, the number one cause of death, but most people were dying by the time they were 65, and most people by heart disease. So he was intrigued by that, and he began to ask the question, okay, so what's going on here? So the first thing they looked at were genes, thinking that there was something really unusual about the people in this town. They were Italian immigrants that came from Roseto, Italy, so figuring it was something unusual about their genetics. But what they found is that Rosetans who immigrated to other parts of the United States had the same death rates as the rest of the United States. So it wasn't genes. So I thought, well, maybe there's something in the water, like something in the environment. So they compared some local towns, and these local towns that were very similar, they consisted of immigrants, had similar death rates to the rest of the U.S. So then they said, well, maybe it's diet or maybe it's exercise. And these individuals had long given up their healthy Mediterranean diet and had adopted, the standard American diet. And this was not a group of individuals who was getting up at 6 a.m. to work out, do yoga. They tended to be very unhealthy. A lot of them smoked, and that left the fact that it was actually Roseto itself, and it was the social connections of these individuals. They often lived in multi-generational homes. They gathered frequently with big groups. They celebrated. They were out in the streets. And so it was concluded that it was these social connections. And it was actually met with a lot of resistance in the medical community, saying, how can this actually be the case, that just being with other people and being connected actually has a type of health effect? And since then, there's been multiple studies showing the power of our social connections. And people say, well, how many friends do I need? And how long do I have to have them for? And you know what? If you just have one close friend or one close family member, that's really all that you need. Somebody that you can call, and count on in a crisis moment. And it's not like you need to be spending 24/7, around people to feel socially connected and not lonely. But it does play a really, really important role in our overall health. And I think it's one of the things that we often neglect. It's one of those first things to go when we're really busy and we don't have time, we don't connect with people, and we really need to, I feel, make a stronger effort to do that for overall health and look at it as a health behavior.
Right. Well, and you mentioned it's not just always, it is important to have that person to call when something's going on or something's going wrong. But if nothing's going on and you're just friends with somebody and you're the person that just, and I know people have said this, like, oh my gosh, this person's so great because they just call me out of the blue and check on me. Right. And there could be nothing going on, but it's like, but for me, that receiving that call, is like, oh, somebody cares. Like, you'll always lift your spirits because, like, oh, they were thinking of me. That's awesome. And it's a way of giving back, but I think it solidifies that connection that, like that, hey, yes, there is a relationship there and it is important and I'm not lonely. And so you automatically start having more positive thoughts.
Yeah, agreed. It's spot on what you're saying and how important it is for our health.
Yeah. And so, but the psychology of our health, like how we think and how we manifest all that stuff internally, plays out in what we do and the choices we make, right?
Right. Yeah. We're creatures of habit. And, I see this oftentimes, especially we're about mid-January now, and we just got into like the New Year's resolutions. And typically, the top 3 resolutions that people try to set are regarding their health. Sometimes you got finances in there, but it's that they want to lose weight, they want to eat healthy, and they want to exercise more.
Right.
And if you don't set up a plan for success with this, then it becomes very difficult for people to do. And I say, don't go and jump in and try to change, multiple things about your health all at once. Try to do these small changes and create some success, because we know that to create a habit, typically on average takes about 2 months, but there's a lot of variability, meaning that for some people, they can start to do something and within about 2 weeks, it becomes a habit. Right. Some people, it can be upwards of 250 days. So what I tell people is, we're human. And if you're trying, let's say, to follow a healthy diet, and a day or 2 or even 3, you don't eat very healthy, don't give it up altogether. Get right back, we're kind of right back on that train for overall health. But I think what's really good for people is accountability, whether you're, you invest with someone else, you tell somebody what you're trying to do, one of your close friends, maybe you try to do it together with them, and that you track what you're doing. And that I think journaling is a really, really positive health behavior, whether you're tracking, your exercise or your diet or, what you're grateful for. We do know, for example, that people who keep a food log, the sole fact of just tracking what you're eating every day, because we're not very good at recalling what we eat, and we tend to actually underestimate how much we've actually eaten. And the sole fact of just keeping track of what you're eating brings more awareness to what you're eating, and just doing that alone will lead to weight loss from some research studies that have actually done this. So we tend to think that to be healthy takes an extreme amount of time and it's really expensive, and it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be that way. I tell people, if you have to do what you enjoy and be realistic with what's going on in your life.
Well, it's one of the things that I immediately thought of when you said, that we underestimate, how much we ate in the previous meal or a couple of meals ago. And it made me think like I've got kids that are 11 and 13. And I was talking to somebody the other day about it's when you see them every day, you don't necessarily always gather like how much they've grown until it's like, maybe they walk by a certain place and you're like, oh my gosh, how did you get so tall? But you don't see it, every day. Because our minds are funny with that memory piece, right? And so it's like, and sometimes we might go, oh well, it's been 3 weeks since I had that piece of cake, and so I should be fine. It was like 3 days ago, or we forget that we had the other thing. And so I agree with you that food logging, because it brings it more to mind of like, oh, and not that it's bad to make mistakes. It's fine to make mistakes. Like it's fine to do those things, but if you're trying to make a change, to be aware of how bad the change actually is, or like how bad the habit you're trying to change is. A lot of times we don't realize that. And streaming, I think, it can teach you this very easily. Streaming shows, when you sit down to watch a show, if you actually log when I sat down and when I got up, and you go, I'm going to watch one show, and then you realize like you watched 4 because they just, Netflix is great about just starting the next episode right after the next. And you realize I just wasted 2 hours of my life. Or maybe not wasted. Maybe that because you did some entertainment from it or whatever, but maybe part of that could have been used for something else.
Right, exactly. And you bring that point of it's almost mindless, right? And we've all done this. Yeah, we're watching the next Netflix series and they're brilliant, right? Because they'll start the next one. And same with, social media or being on our devices, because I'll go on YouTube for something. And I know over on that right-hand side, they just know what I'm going to be drawn to and what I'm going to want to watch. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, I'm just going to click on this one thing and watch it. And then it can be a half hour later. And then I get kind of mad at myself because I wasted this time So I think it's important, put limits on these types of things. So if you want to, scroll through social media or, watch, one of your Netflix shows, kind of consciously state, okay, I'm going to go on social media for 15 minutes, set a timer. And then when that timer goes off, that's it, and that you are done. So I think it's really for us to become more conscious of it.
Mm-hmm.
When we become more conscious and more present in the moment and what we're doing and focusing on that, then that creates a lot of awareness. And also we tend to be happier when we're focusing on what we're doing at that point in time. Believe it or not, even if you're stuck in traffic and you're just focusing on that point in time, as opposed to thinking about what you need to do or where you're going to be an hour from now or what you did yesterday, you'll actually be happier if you're focusing just at that, what you're doing at that point in time.
Right. And one of the things that you mentioned is like, well, actually, it just left me. But anyway, looking at it and how you talk to yourself, right? You said that consciously say, I'm going to spend 15 minutes on this and be aware of it. But that also translates to how we talk to ourselves about other things. Like if you're wanting to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're wanting to be like change your healthy meal plans, and you still identify with like, oh, but I'm the person that eats the garbage and the junk food and how am I ever going to become the healthy person that eats all the 80% vegetables or whatever it is that they're trying to change? But if you start telling yourself, I am a healthy eater, like even if you're still making those choices, you're fighting that on the front end, right? Because you're consciously telling yourself of the new person you're going to become. And it's, I know it sounds sort of hokey, but from a mental brain standpoint, that actually works, right?
Yeah, it does work. You're spot on with this. And we call like these positive affirmations,
right?
By saying, I am a healthy eater, or I am a regular exerciser. Even if you're not, by stating that, and even better, writing it down, is going to kind of change how you think about things, and ultimately it can have a powerful effect on your behavior. So I encourage people, and you see these in a lot of these like gratitude and thankful types of journals where they, express, a couple things that you're thankful for. And then oftentimes there's a place to put like that positive affirmation of I am, I am, socially connected, or I eat a lot of vegetables, whatever that may be. And you're true. It does kind of sound hokey, right? But it's oftentimes these simple, small little things that we do that have really large impacts on our overall health. And, when we take a look at, it's really hard to change people's behaviors. And I tell people, take a look at your environment. And, that's one of the most important things that we can do to change our behavior. So if you want to begin to eat healthier, go through your fridge and go through your cupboards and get rid of, those processed and unhealthy foods. And then this way, you're not going to eat as much of them because they're not readily available for you. And then you'll probably just eat them less, and more likely when you're outside, outside of the house. So by doing these kind of simple little, things around the house and around the environment, around your environment can have a large impact on your health.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I tell people to do in addition to that is like, okay, well, just try and make the change of no longer going through a drive-through. Because it's so easy to just be rushed. And like you said, you're in your car, you're thinking about different things, you're in traffic, maybe you can't go down a street in any town, I think, in America nowadays and not see fast food signs just left and right. Because they know where they're supposed to go. They know where the traffic goes. They know, they've done their research on where are the hot spots, and they know the colors that are going to drive us into their facility, all of that stuff. And so if you just say, okay, I'm not going to, because getting out of your car to go in to a fast food restaurant, a lot of times, if you're by yourself, is a big obstacle. And it's like, okay, we'll put a big obstacle in your way that is going to stop you, or at least make you have to think about it. And if you're talking these other ways and starting to have these other affirmations about, I am a healthy person, I am trying to make these changes, because it's so easy to just go through a drive-through.
I think it's brilliant. And it creates whole other layers of complexity, right? And the sole fact of stating that if I want to get fast food, I'm going to have to actually park my car and walk in. That's going to deter a lot of people. And we often think, from our health standpoint, that what's really bad from a food standpoint are food deserts, meaning that you don't live within a mile or two of where you can get fresh produce and healthy food. But it's not what's not available. It's actually what's available that has more of an impact on our health. So it's not the food deserts are bad, but what's worse are what we call food swamps, where we have access to so much unhealthy food and so much fast food. So it's not necessarily what's not there, but it's what's there and what's available. And if we make it more complex, like saying, okay, if I want fast food, I need to park my car and walk in, that's going to deter a lot of people. And if they consciously begin to think about that, I really like that.
Well, and you mentioned that, and it made me think automatically of, I serve on our school district's student health advisory committee. And of course, one of the things we talk about is nutrition and the changes and things that they're doing. And neither of my kids are in high school yet, but we talk with the director of nutrition about what they're doing at the high school, because obviously that's a huge population and a point where they're making a lot more choices on their own. Elementary, middle school, a lot of times the parents are still involved a lot heavily. And they're served something in the cafeteria, and so they don't really necessarily realize that they can buck the system and not take it. They're still impressionable. But at the high school, and it's very much a challenge for them to make it, this is appealing, this healthy food is appealing. And so that's coming up with different names for dishes, so it doesn't look, it doesn't just say it's Brussels sprouts, it's something else, or and it's a big challenge, because the line for the pizza is, down the hall, and some of the kids don't get lunch because they're in line for so long, because it's, they only have a short period of time and they're not about to go over to the salad area and get something. And so I think making, like you said, making it aware of here's what is available, and making sure that people understand what that all is and how it can be nutritious for them is a big challenge we have.
It's a huge challenge, and we're bombarded with so much misinformation and really so much terrible food. And you're right, when your kids are younger, you have more control, right, over what they're eating. I feel that once they start to drive, and then they have more of that flexibility, and you don't necessarily know what they're eating in high school. They may go off campus, and it's oftentimes, they don't tend to have a lot of money. So they'll go and get the fast food. And I like to say, well, there still are some healthy options and, some things that way, but it's really kind of, constant reminders and constantly talking to our kids. And we know, with one of the best things for kids to eat healthy is if the parents eat healthy as well. And serving as that role model, in particular, the mom tends to have more of an influence than the father, on the healthy eating. And I think that's really important, looking at those role models, and that knowing that if you're setting the stage when your kids are young, and if these health behaviors become ingrained, that it's going to track with them over time.
Right. Well, no, and I mean, I see that, with the mom's influence and even the grandmom's influence, right? With holiday parties and holiday gatherings and special events. And it's always like, oh, I want grandma's pie, or I want grandma's, mashed potatoes, or I want, because you associate that, not necessarily you associate the what the food did for you, but you associate, like we were talking about, the relationships and the events and the setting. And I have had people tell me, there's no way I could make those changes because food is too much of an entertainment for me. And I'm like, you can still have the entertainment if we can change the food that's there so it's healthier, right? It doesn't all have to be healthy. It can still have some other stuff, but overall, at least having some color versus just a bland, everything is fried and white and flour based and sugar based. It's like, you might have the good feelings are not going to come from, because you'll feel it the day after that. You're going to realize that, like, oh, I shouldn't have eaten that, or I had too much of this. But that's not what you remember 2 years down the road. You remember the party, right? You remember everybody being together and the fun conversation and singing the family and all of that. And so making that distinction between the two, and then it's not food driving that, but it's the people driving that. I think it's huge for people to be able to do that.
And that's another great point, right? And when we think, we oftentimes associate food with certain activities, but it's or holidays, but it's also the people, right? And that's really what we end up remembering at the end of the day, is who was there, what were the connections, who were we talking to, how did they make us feel? And we're looking at our overall health, and people say, well, what's one of the best things that I can do for my health? I say, get outside. We spend upwards of 90+% of our day inside. Yeah. And there's a lot of health benefits from being outside, especially if you can add what we call nature, like some green space and blue space, which is water. It just puts us not only in a better mood. So, an interesting study took a look, for example, at where people were exercising and what were the mood effects from it. And we do know that when you engage in exercise, no matter where it is, you will report afterwards that you're less stressed, you're less anxious, you're in a better mood, you have more energy. And that happens no matter where you exercise. But if you actually are exercising outside in green space or blue space, you get an added boost to it. So an added, that added health benefit. So where you're doing things as well, really, really matters. And for kids, we know the sole fact of just telling them to go outside, and having them outside, they are going to be more active than if they were inside. Even if you don't tell them what they need to be doing outside, they're going to be more active. And what's really important is just this free play and recess. Right. Kids are going to be more active actually during free play and recess than they tend to be during like structured sport activities or during PE class as well.
Well, yeah, and I see that with my 11-year-old son, because it's like, okay, what'd y'all do today? And of course, he's far onto the active side and is not really appreciating school at the moment. And so first, what was your favorite part of the day? Well, it was recess, and what was the next part? It was lunch, and this PE. And it's like, okay, well, can we get to some subject matter that you actually learned? But he'll be at home, and I'm like, okay, you need to go outside and play. And he's like, well, I don't know what to do. I'm like, okay, go play basketball. I don't want to play basketball. Okay, well, just go in the front yard and do something. Like, you just need to be outside, because I know you need the sunlight, you need the space, you need just to not be in front of a device or sitting down. And then 5 minutes later, I'll look out the window and see what he's up to. And, he'll have a stick and he's hitting it at something, or he's running around, or he's envisioning friends and playing in different things, and I'm like, okay, that's what we want, right? And we get that as kids, but we forget that as adults, we still, maybe not in that form of like we're out in our front yard looking like we've lost it because we're talking to people, but like we need that environment, in that like stress reliever, like you said, of being outside and just almost like taking a minute to forget your responsibilities and just be in nature.
Yeah, exactly. And I love what you say too about just, sending the kids outside and just playing, and they'll eventually start to do that. Mm-hmm. And some organizations are going as far as saying that we need to provide like a prescription for nature, a nature prescription. I know, and how much time we need to be spending outside. And I don't think we need to necessarily go that far, but I think what we need to do is create the awareness about it. And your story of your child, I remember, and this is going back several years ago, when our middle child was in elementary school, and I pick him up from school one day, and it's a typical thing. Oh, what'd you like about school today? And his response was nothing. And I'm like, oh, come on. So I thought, well, let me rephrase this. And kind of going down, well, what did you, like, least or like most? And he began to say, well, the thing I liked most was leaving school. I'll be like, well, okay, well then what was the second next thing? And he said recess. And I said, okay, and how about the third? And he said, PE. And he began to go through it. And it struck me that, it was recess because it was free time and free play. And I said, what's so bad about school? And he said, Mom, they make me sit still for too long. Yeah. And I thought, okay, I get that, because, kids need to move. I think having standing desks in classrooms, and the fidgeting, actually we villainize fidgeting as this really bad behavior. Mm-hmm. That means that people aren't paying attention, or they're not focusing. But there's emerging science that's spread out around all these different disciplines, showing that it actually has health effects. That we know that people who are high fidgeters end up losing more weight than people who are low fidgeters. It can actually help with help with attention and focus. So it's really interesting to see that there are these benefits of just fidgeting and doing these small movements during the day.
No, I fully agree. And he had thankfully some great teachers that had like little fidget toys that they would allow in the and actually they could earn them. Like if they answer something right or do a project right or whatever, like they would earn more fidget toys. And then they could trade them with friends, it's like whatever they wanted. But, they allowed them to, and my son is definitely in that scale of like, if he's got something in his hand and he's doing this, he's a lot more focused on his schoolwork than if you say, okay, sit and do your schoolwork. And he's just sitting there and he's like, I don't know where to begin. I don't know what to do. And then it's tears and frustration. And, but I fully agree. And I would love to know more about like, as adults, because we get into, especially in the corporate world, we get into these situations where we're in a business meeting or, a big office space. And it's like, you're supposed to be very professional and to start fidgeting or start having something, or people be like, oh, you're not paying attention to me. That's the impression. Whereas like, actually I'm more focused, for some people that's more focus.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm one of those people that has a hard time, sitting for an hour at a time during a meeting. And I will get up and go to the back of the room or over and kind of lean against a wall and just like slight movement. So, and I need to do that for me to be able to keep my focus and keep my attention. If you don't want to be disruptive during the meeting, I mean, you can do toe tapping and stuff underneath the desk, and nobody is going to know that you're doing that. But we need to kind of be aware, and honestly, prolonged sitting, which tends to be defined in the research of sitting for longer than an hour. What you kind of want to do is do a reset, whether you just stand up for a couple minutes or go for a light walk and almost reset your body. So we want to be aware of that as well. Like we villainized our chairs, that they're these evil things and that we sit too much. And we probably do sit way too much during the day. And the whole sole fact of just standing is a good health behavior. I know my kids, when they were younger, oftentimes they would do their homework in the kitchen at the island because it was really high. And that's because they wanted to stand. And I would just let them do that. Because it was just better for them and helped them with their focus. And they didn't realize that, and they didn't articulate that to me, but I knew that's what was going on.
Yeah. Well, and I remember hearing this one time that it was a sports reporter on his radio show, and he just made an observation, and it stuck with me. This was probably 15 years ago, that he said, it's strange, but when I'm home alone, I tend to stand to eat. If nobody else is around, I'm standing to eat. But, if other people are here, I'll sit at the table and eat. But like, I'd rather stand and eat. And I'm like, okay, this is a guy who sits at his desk on the radio. Like he sits a lot. And I'm like, oh, it makes total sense. And I see that now, and my son's starting to do it. We come home for dinner and he'd rather stand at the table than sit. And I get it now because he sits so much of the day. And at his age, at 11 and being so active, he's like, I can't anymore. I need to go do something. And that could be, like you said, it's a little just standing throughout the day, whether you have a standing desk or not, but just taking that moment to move around.
I think it's smart. And I do really love that about the eating. And we always believe that, when we're eating, we should be sitting down. And I like that. I often will eat standing up at the island, and I'm walking around and getting stuff done. And I just thought, what if we took away all the chairs? Then we would have to stand, and it would be, a-okay to do that. So I think what people really need to become aware of is their behaviors, and begin to track them, whether it's their movement, what they're eating, how much they're sleeping. And I like people when we take a look at our movement or our exercise, I say, take a look at your whole 24 hours of movement, because it's all related. So meaning, track how much you exercise, how much you stand during the day and are sitting, how much light activity you're doing, and how much you're sleeping. Because
Right.
sleeping is a movement as well. And pretty much guaranteed, if you don't get enough sleep at night, you're probably not going to be in the right mood and have the energy to move as much during the day. So kind of to be aware, of how they're all related. And I know there are some, wearable things that will actually track that,
Right.
where they will track your sleep and your activity of the day and kind of give you what they call, let's say, a readiness score to say, okay, how ready are you
Right.
for that day? And maybe be aware that you had a bad night's sleep and you're going to need to take it, a little more easier, during the day. So I think it's really important for people to begin to become aware of how all of these things are related. And it's just not it's our behaviors and our health is just not in isolation.
Right. Well, and one of the things I do with my daughter, because she's in 7th grade, and she is starting to get into that point where she's staying up really, really late on her own. She has a bedtime. She goes in her room. It's quiet time, all that. But, she's staying up really, really late before she falls asleep. And of course, she has to get up to go to school. And so there's nights where she gets maybe 5 or 6 hours of sleep instead of the 7 or 8. And, at the end of the day, I won't do this in the morning because then it causes but at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, how did your day go? Well, this was tough, or that was tough, or, this class was rougher than normal. I'm like, okay, do you think that had anything to do with not being rested well? And, usually she's like, I could see that. Yeah, I'm in a different mood. Because I'm trying to help her understand herself as opposed to me teaching her or me preaching to her, like, you have to change this. It's her trying to get her to understand her habits and how things are affecting down the road. Just like you said, I think a lot of us can learn from that from a standpoint of, oh, that business meeting went horrible, or that conversation with my spouse was miserable. And it's like, okay, well, look back and how mentally and physically and rested were you, like, set up for that conversation at that time? Because a lot of times that, when we're not rested, we're on a higher alert, right? Where our systems are like ready to just defend ourselves and fight, as opposed to just being like, okay, let me take this in, let me see what's going on. And so that tends to ignite things a little bit higher than they need to be.
Yeah, I think, you bring up that excellent point of kind of creating that awareness, even, for your daughter to say, okay, well, let's look back and how did your day go? And do you think that it was related to your sleep? And then to create that awareness of the importance, the importance of sleep. Unfortunately, we're really busy. That tends to be the thing that we give up, right? Saying,
Right.
oh, well, I'm going to give up an hour or two, of sleep, not realizing how then the next day you're going to have more of a difficult time focusing. You're probably not going to be as productive, and how all of these things are related. What I tell our youngest, who's 14, he's at that point where he really wants to grow. So I tell him, well, you grow when you're sleeping. So that's why you want to make sure, that you're getting enough sleep. So I try
Right.
to spin it that way, because, with the devices, and they want to be connected with their friends, or they want to watch TV or their sports team, staying up later and later, and then they have to get up for school is really tough. I really would love to see, and I know some school districts have done this, where they push back, the start time. And we know that these, some studies have shown that these school districts that have done that push back the start time, by an hour and a half for high school students. It actually has incredible health effects where, the students' GPAs across the whole school goes up. There's less truancy, less tardiness, and like all of these positive types of behaviors. And it just comes down to show that we really do need our sleep, and kids in particular need their sleep. And as parents, we really need to try to enforce that, but it's tough to do.
It is. Well, and I want to be respectful of your time, Heather, and I greatly appreciate it, because I think we could talk for a long time about all the different health things and how people can help themselves with, just like you said, it's the small habits. It's making the small decisions, small changes that are going to impact your health down the road if you just continue with them. But I want to give you an opportunity to tell people, like, how can people get a hold of you and follow what you're doing? And I know you've written a book, and so I'd love you to, take a chance to promote that as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. You can find me, I'm on my company, wellnessdiscoverylabs.com. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram. and Facebook as well. I always joke, I've written, several textbooks for my students.
Right.
But about a year ago, I wrote more of a book. It was science-based, but it was my story. Our oldest son ended up getting really sick, and it was a struggle for us to figure out what was wrong. And me as a health psychologist, I thought, my family is healthy. We have to. This is what I
Right.
do until all
Right.
of a sudden you're not. And I actually went on leave from work so that I would get up at 4 a.m. and began to research. He has Crohn's disease, what he had, and how I could get him healthy, healthy again, and try to understand that. And it largely was through his diet and, reducing stress and stuff. And I struggled with that, and I never envisioned writing this book, but it kind of started over time with the stories and the breaking down the science to say, okay, these are the things that we need to be whether you have some type of chronic disease or don't,
Right.
for your health. And that you can get that on Amazon, and it's called Invisible Illness. And
Cool.
I have also written several what we call guided science-based journals to help people on their health wellness journey. So whether they want to sleep better, exercise more, eat better, reduce their stress, or just become happier, I have several of these journals that are very, very inexpensive, and they're available on Amazon as well.
And I will link those so that people can just very quickly from the show notes go and check those out and find out more about what you're doing and how you're changing the health world and how you're helping people with their lives. Because I think it's as we talked before, like we started recording, is that like both of us are trying to make an impact, and you're doing that, and it shows. And so anything I can do to help, we're gonna do what we can.
Thank you. And thank you for everything that you do for health wellness.
Thank you.